I never thought a pair of old running shoes would cost someone their career, but that's exactly what happened the night my daughter introduced me to her fiancé. The restaurant was one of those places where they don't list prices on the menu. You know the type. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. Waiters in crisp white shirts who refill your water glass before you've taken 2 sips. Brandon had insisted on choosing the venue. Somewhere appropriate, he'd told Sophie over the phone, which I'd overheard during our weekly Sunday breakfast. I pulled my 15-year-old Prius into the valet area, watching the attendant's face fall slightly as I handed him the keys. The car next to mine was a Tesla Model X, gleaming black with those falcon wing doors that always reminded me of a confused bird. Through the restaurant's glass front, I could see a couple sitting at what must have been our table. The man wore a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The woman had that particular posture that comes from years of private school and cotillion classes. I glanced down at my flannel shirt and jeans. The sneakers I was wearing had a hole forming near the left toe. Sophie had asked me to dress nice, but this was nice for me. I'd built a $2 billion company in these clothes. Well, not these exact clothes, but you get the idea. The hostess's smile was professional as she led me through the dining room, but I caught the slight hesitation when she looked at my shoes. I'd learned a long time ago that most people see what they expect to see. They see flannel and old sneakers. They think struggling. They don't think retired at 52 after selling to Google. "Dad!" Sophie stood up, her face bright with that nervous excitement I remembered from her childhood piano recitals. She was 26 now, working in marketing at a mid-sized agency, making her own way in the world, just like I'd always hoped she would. The man beside her rose as well, and I got my first good look at Brandon Whitmore III. Yes, the third. He'd mentioned it twice in the first minute we shook hands. His grip was firm but brief, the kind of handshake that says obligation fulfilled rather than pleased to meet you. "Mr. Martinez," he said, his voice carrying that particular accent that comes from boarding schools and summer homes in the Hamptons. "Brandon Whitmore, the third." There it was, twice. "Robert," I said. "Just Robert." His mother, Margaret, extended a hand that felt like touching a store mannequin, cold and somehow not quite real. Margaret Whitmore. What a quaint restaurant choice. She glanced around as if seeing it for the first time, though I'd bet money they'd been here before. We usually dine at Gary Danko's, but Brandon insisted we try somewhere new. I'd been to Gary Danko's twice. Once to celebrate my company's Series A funding, once the week before we signed the Google deal. I'd paid for both meals in cash, left a 40% tip each time, but I didn't mention that. Brandon's father, James Whitmore Jr., gave me a nod that somehow managed to be both polite and dismissive. "James, I'm a managing partner at Whitmore, Sutton, and Chase." He handed me a business card without being asked. "Been with the firm 32 years. We handle some of the largest corporate litigation in the state." "Impressive," I said, because it was. I slipped the card into my back pocket, where it joined 3 crumpled receipts and a grocery list I'd forgotten about. We sat. The waiter appeared with menus bound in leather. Brandon ordered wine without asking anyone's preference. It was French, expensive, and arrived in a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly electricity bill. When the waiter poured a taste for Brandon, he swirled it, sniffed it, and nodded with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice. "So, Robert," Margaret said, her smile tight, "Sophie tells us you work with startups?" "I do," I said. "Helping young companies grow." "That's wonderful," she said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Consulting?" "Something like that." Brandon leaned forward. "What kind of startups? Tech? Biotech? Clean energy?" His tone was that of someone about to lecture, not someone genuinely asking. "Mostly tech. AI, machine learning, some SaaS companies." "Ah." Brandon exchanged a glance with his father. "The AI space is getting crowded. A lot of fly-by-night operations making big promises. You have to know what you're doing to separate the real players from the noise." "True enough," I said. The first course arrived. Some kind of foam on a small plate with 3 strategic drops of sauce. Brandon immediately launched into a story about a deal his firm, Summit Partners, was about to close. "We're looking at a revolutionary AI startup," he said, cutting his foam into even smaller pieces. "They're developing natural language processing that's going to change everything. The founders are Stanford grads, both of them. Good pedigree. We're putting in 30 million at a 200 million valuation." "Sounds promising," I said. "It's not just promising, Robert. It's transformative." He set down his fork. "Look, I know you work with startups, but there's a difference between what you probably do and what we do at Summit. We're talking portfolio composition, IRR metrics, deal flow, cap table management. In our world, the real Silicon Valley, it's about sophisticated instruments and understanding market dynamics at a level that..." He paused, his smile sympathetic. "You simply wouldn't understand these kinds of sophisticated instruments." Sophie shifted in her seat. I could see the discomfort in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She didn't know. I'd made sure of that. "I'm sure you're right," I said. "Tell me more about this AI company. What's their edge?" Brandon's face lit up. He loved talking about himself. "They've got a proprietary algorithm for semantic understanding. The founders, brilliant guys. I play squash with one of them at the club. They've been working on this for 3 years. We're not the only ones interested, of course. There's another investor sniffing around, some angel investor, but we're confident we'll close it." "Angel investor?" I asked. "Yeah, one of these tech guys, with more money than sense." Brandon laughed. "No offense to your clients, Robert, but there's a reason professional VCs exist. These angel investors, they get lucky on one exit and suddenly think they're Warren Buffett. They don't understand due diligence, market timing, exit strategies. They just throw money at things that sound cool." Margaret nodded. "It's important to work with people who understand your world, people from the right background." Her eyes flickered to my sneakers, visible under the table. "Financial compatibility is so important in a marriage. Wouldn't you agree, Robert?" "I think character is important," I said. "Well, yes, of course." She waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. "But character doesn't pay the bills. Sophie is used to a certain lifestyle. Brandon can provide that. He makes well into 6 figures, and that's before his trust fund distributions." Sophie's face had gone red. "Mom," she started. "Margaret," Brandon corrected gently. "We talked about this. It's Margaret now." I watched them, all of them, the way Brandon interrupted Sophie, the way his parents looked at her like she was a acquisition they weren't quite sure about, the way Sophie's shoulders hunched slightly, making herself smaller. The main course came, some kind of fish with a sauce I couldn't pronounce. Brandon talked through the entire meal. His recent promotion to senior associate, his family's property in the Hamptons, his plans to make partner before he turned 35, his father's connections, his mother's charity work. Not once did he ask Sophie about her work. Not once did he ask me anything beyond that first dismissive question. When dessert arrived, something with gold leaf on it, because of course James cleared his throat. "So, Robert, what exactly is it you do?" Sophie's been a bit vague. "Are you between jobs at the moment?" "Dad!" Sophie's voice was sharp. "It's a fair question," James said. "I'm a practical man. I want to make sure my future daughter-in-law comes from a stable situation. No offense intended." "None taken," I said, though we both knew that was a lie. Brandon leaned back in his chair. "Look, Robert, I want to be frank with you, man to man." He glanced at Sophie. "Sophie is amazing. She's beautiful, smart, ambitious. But she's also, well, she's not from our world. And that's okay. That's what makes her interesting. But I want you to know that I'm going to take care of her. She won't have to worry about money or security or any of that. I've got it covered." "How generous," I said quietly. "I can see you're concerned about finances," Brandon continued. "And I get it. It's tough out there for guys like you. The tech market is brutal if you're not in the right circles. But here's what I'm thinking. I've got connections. Real connections. Maybe I can introduce you to some people. Get you some consulting gigs. Better than whatever you're doing now." He smiled. "Consider it a wedding present to my future father-in-law." The table went silent. Even the restaurant noise seemed to fade for a moment. Sophie was staring at her plate. I could see her hands trembling slightly. She'd always been sensitive to tension, even as a child. When she was 8, she'd cried for an hour after I'd gotten into an argument with a contractor who'd tried to overcharge me. I'd held her and promised that sometimes you had to stand up for yourself, but that didn't mean you had to be cruel about it. I thought about that now, about cruelty, about the difference between standing up for yourself and stepping on others. That's very kind of you, I said. I'll keep it in mind. Margaret smiled. It's settled then. Brandon will help poor Robert find his footing, she said. Poor Robert. The way you might say, poor reception or poor weather. The check came. Brandon grabbed it before anyone else could move. He made a show of pulling out a black American Express card. This one's on me, he announced. Consider it a celebration of our families coming together. As we stood to leave, Brandon put his hand on my shoulder. Don't worry, Robert. You're part of the family now. We take care of our own. I nodded, smiled, shook hands again, hugged Sophie, and told her I'd call her tomorrow. On the drive home in my old Prius, I thought about that dinner, about the assumptions they'd made, the judgments, the casual cruelty dressed up as concern. I thought about the phone call I'd gotten 3 days earlier, from David Chen, managing partner at Summit Partners. David and I had been friends for 15 years, since back when he was raising his first fund, and I was working 20-hour days on my Series B. Robert, he'd said, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've got a young guy here, Brandon something. He's been running his mouth about closing a deal with that AI company you're looking at, the one with the NLP algorithm. Neural semantics, I'd said. Yeah, I've been talking with the founders. Brandon doesn't know you're involved. He thinks you're just Sophie's dad, some guy who helps startups. David had laughed. Should I tell him? No, I'd said. Let's see how this plays out. Now, driving through San Francisco at night, I pulled out my phone at a red light. I opened my contacts and found the entry for Jessica Park and Thomas Wu, the founders of Neural Semantics. We'd been negotiating for 6 weeks. They were brilliant, hungry, and ethical, the kind of founders I loved backing. I typed out a message. Ready to finalize if you are. Let's do this. The response came back before the light turned green. Yes, let's do it. Thank you for believing in us. I put the phone away and drove home, where I spent the evening reading in my study. The same study where I'd spent countless nights building my first company. The walls were covered in photos. Me and Sophie at her high school graduation. Me and my late wife, Maria, at our 20th anniversary. Me shaking hands with Sundar Pichai the day we signed the Google deal. There was no photo of me in a suit. No photo of me looking successful in the way people like the Whitmores would recognize. Because that had never been the point. 3 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Sophie, and she was crying. Dad, something happened. Brandon. He's freaking out. He lost some deal at work. Some AI company chose another investor, and now his boss is furious, and he's saying his reputation is damaged, and she took a shaky breath. Dad, did you know about this? The company is called Neural Semantics. That's AI, right? You said you work with AI companies. I sat up in bed. I might have heard something about it. Silence on the other end. Then, Dad, what did you do? I invested in a company I believed in, with founders I respect. Founders who value substance over pedigree. More silence. I could hear her breathing, working through it. Dad, how much did you invest? 20 million. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, $20 million? Dad, you have $20 million? I have more than that, sweetheart. Quite a bit more. But you drive a Prius. You wear flannel shirts. You shop at Costco. I do. Because those things don't define who I am. The Google exit was 8 years ago. I sold my company for $2 billion. Since then, I've been doing what I love, helping founders who actually need help. Founders who are building something real, not just playing status games. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to find someone who loved you for you, not for your last name or your father's bank account. Brandon showed me exactly who he is, Sophie. He showed you too. You just weren't ready to see it. I heard her crying. Then, he called you poor. He offered to get you consulting gigs, like you were some charity case. He did. And you just sat there. You didn't defend yourself. I didn't need to defend myself. I needed to see what kind of man your fiancé really was. When people think you can't help them, that's when they show their true character. The crying intensified. I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have said something. I should have defended you. I was just so scared. I finished. I know. That's what worried me most. Not that he was rude to me, but that you were afraid to speak up, she sobbed. I thought I loved him. Maybe you did. Maybe you loved who you thought he was. But love isn't enough if it makes you smaller. If it makes you quiet when you should speak up. Your mother, God rest her soul, she never let me or anyone else diminish her. Not once in 30 years. I miss her, Sophie whispered. Me too. We talked for another hour. About Brandon, about the Whitmores, about what she wanted in a partner versus what she thought she was supposed to want. By the time we hung up, she'd made her decision. That afternoon, Brandon called me. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again, and again. On the fourth call, I answered, Robert, finally. Listen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? I'm actually pretty busy, Brandon. It's important. It's about... I need your advice. About the business. I heard you might have some connections in the AI space, and you heard I have connections. Yeah, David Chen mentioned. Wait, you know David? We're friends? Have been for 15 years? Silence. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Robert, you're not just a consultant, are you? No, Brandon. I'm not just a consultant. What are you? I'm the angel investor you told me had more money than sense. The silence that followed was beautiful. It stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. You're the one who invested in neural semantics. I am. I didn't know. Sophie never said. Why didn't you say something? You never asked. You assumed. You looked at my shoes and my car and my clothes, and you assumed you knew everything about me. You assumed you were better than me. Smarter. More sophisticated. And you know what? That told me everything I needed to know about you. Robert, please. I made a mistake. I was trying to impress you. My parents, they raised me to value certain things, and I know now that was wrong. If you could just... Brandon, I'm going to stop you right there. This isn't about the deal. Honestly, it's not even about me. It's about my daughter. You spent an entire dinner talking about yourself, your job, your accomplishments, your world. You didn't ask her about her dreams or her work or what makes her happy. You treated her like an acquisition, a pretty addition to your portfolio. That's not, and worse than that, you let your mother suggest that Sophie should consider because of financial compatibility. You let your parents look at her like she wasn't quite good enough, like she needed to be grateful for your attention. And you know what you did when all that was happening? Silence. Nothing, I said. You did nothing. You didn't defend her. You didn't stand up for her. You just sat there and let it happen. So here's my advice, Brandon. The only advice I'm ever going to give you. Find someone you actually respect. Someone you see as an equal. Someone you defend even when it's uncomfortable. Because that's what love looks like. And until you understand that, you simply don't understand my world. I hung up. Sophie broke off the engagement that evening. Brandon tried to apologize, tried to explain, tried to promise he'd change, but she was done. I'd raised her to know her worth, and she finally remembered it. 6 months later, Sophie introduced me to someone new. Marcus taught high school English in Oakland. He drove a Honda Civic with a bumper sticker that said Reading is rebellion. When we met for coffee, he asked me about my work, really asked, and then listened to my answer. Then he asked follow-up questions. When Sophie got up to use the restroom, Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Martinez, I want you to know something. I don't make a lot of money. I probably never will. But I love your daughter. She's brilliant and kind and funny. And being with her makes me want to be a better man. I don't have much to offer except myself. But I promise I'll spend every day trying to deserve her. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the earnestness in his eyes. The way his hand had instinctively reached for Sophie's when she'd told a story about a difficult client. The way he'd laughed at her jokes like they were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "Marcus," I said, "what you just described, that's everything." He smiled, relieved. "I was nervous about meeting you. Sophie said you were. You worked in tech? Sorry, I should know this." I did. I built a company and sold it a while back. Now I help other people build theirs. That's amazing. What kind of company? And we talked, really talked, about technology and education and how to help kids from disadvantaged backgrounds get into STEM fields. Marcus had ideas. Good ideas. He was passionate and informed and thoughtful. When Sophie came back, she saw us deep in conversation, and her face just glowed. That's when I knew she'd be okay. 2 years later, I walked Sophie down the aisle at a small ceremony in Muir Woods. Marcus cried when he saw her. His vows were so heartfelt that half the guests were weeping by the time he finished. His parents, a retired nurse and a postal worker, hugged me like we'd been family for years. At the reception, Sophie pulled me aside. "Thank you, Dad." "For what?" "For the shoes." I looked down at my feet. I was wearing the same old sneakers. The hole near the left toe had gotten bigger. Sophie had begged me to buy new ones for the wedding, but I'd refused. These shoes had been with me through everything. Through building a company, through losing my wife, through that dinner where I'd learned exactly who my daughter was marrying. "They're just shoes, sweetheart." "No, Dad, they're not." She hugged me tight. "They're the reason I'm here with Marcus instead of." She trailed off. "Thank you for teaching me that what matters isn't what someone looks like or where they come from. It's who they are when no one's watching. When there's nothing to gain, that's when you see someone's real character." I held my daughter and thought about that night at the restaurant. About Brandon's assumption. About the casual cruelty of people who measure worth in dollars and pedigrees. I thought about the phone call I'd made. The $20 million decision that had changed everything. People always ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Brandon, about costing him that deal, damaging his reputation, derailing his carefully planned career trajectory. I don't, because here's what I learned in my 63 years on this planet. How you treat people when you think they can't help you reveals who you really are. Brandon looked at a man in old sneakers and saw someone beneath him, someone to pity, someone to patronize. He never saw a father protecting his daughter. He never saw a successful businessman evaluating a potential son-in-law. He never saw someone who had more money in his checking account than Brandon would see in his lifetime. He just saw the shoes, and that's exactly what I needed to see. 3 years after the wedding, Sophie and Marcus had their first child, a daughter. They named her Maria, after my late wife. When I held my granddaughter for the first time, tiny and perfect and full of possibility, I thought about the world she'd grow up in, about the lessons we'd teach her. I thought about how I'd tell her that real strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Real strength is quiet. It's the ability to be underestimated and not feel the need to correct the record. It's knowing your worth, regardless of what others see. It's wearing old shoes to a fancy dinner and not caring that people judge you for it. Because in the end, those judgments say everything about them and nothing about you. I kissed my granddaughter's forehead and whispered, "Your grandma and I, we built something real, not just a company or a bank account. We built a life based on who we were, not what we owned. And your mom, she learned that lesson. Now it's your turn." Sophie leaned against my shoulder, Marcus's arm around her waist. "What are you telling her, Dad?" "I'm telling her about the shoes," I said. Sophie smiled. "Good. That's a good story." And it was. Not because of the money or the company or the revenge, but because of what it taught us. About value, about character, about the difference between appearing successful and actually being successful, about how sometimes the greatest power is in staying silent and letting others reveal themselves. Brandon Whitmore III never did find out exactly how much I was worth. I heard through David Chen that he'd moved to New York, taken a job at a smaller VC firm. Last I heard, he was doing fine. Not great, but fine. I hope he learned something. I hope that somewhere along the way, he figured out that the world isn't divided into his kind of people and everyone else. That sophistication has nothing to do with wine knowledge or boarding schools or trust funds. That the most sophisticated people I've ever met were immigrant founders working out of garage apartments, wearing the same shirt 3 days in a row because they were too focused on building something meaningful to care about appearances. But maybe he didn't learn. Maybe he's still out there, looking at people's shoes and thinking he knows their story. If so, I feel sorry for him, because he'll spend his whole life missing the really interesting people, the ones who don't announce themselves, the ones who change the world in flannel and old sneakers, the ones who understand that in the end, character isn't about what you wear or drive or where you summer. It's about how you treat people, especially the people you think can't do anything for you. That's the lesson I hope my granddaughter learns, not from my bank account or my exit story or the company I built, but from a pair of old shoes with a hole near the left toe, the shoes that taught us what really matters, the shoes that saved my daughter from a life of being made smaller, the shoes that remind me every day that the best investment I ever made wasn't in some AI startup or tech company. It was in teaching my daughter to value substance over appearance, character over credentials, love over status. And that, in the end, is the only legacy that really matters.